and the power of audio and how audio connects us and how we can use it inside our organizations. We're all used to podcast externally, but how can we use them in our organizations? And I'll hand over to Michael, who's going to be my co-presenter today.
Indeed, thanks, Katie. So we're going to run today's session very much like a podcast conversation in itself. We've got a few questions lined up already that have come in, so we're going to be addressed. So Ronnie's going to be answering those. But we want to hear from you too. So do post questions into the chat. Say, put your hand up. Katie just said we record the main session and then we do a quick Q&A at the end, which we won't publish. So feel free and come forward. But as I say, as we go along, do post questions into the chat. I'm going to use my full Sunday name today, Michael, instead of Mike, because we're going to be talking a lot about mics with Ronnie, and I think that would just get really confusing. So over to you.
Thank you. Let's hand over to Ronnie. Tell us a bit about yourselves, Ronnie.
Well, hi everyone. Thanks first and foremost. Welcome to Devon. This is where I live. This is my office. This is where I remotely record podcasts from. That's what I do for a living. I'm a freelance podcast producer. I started off as a journalist about 20 years ago. I worked for IRN, if you know that, in Independent Radio News, the BBC and LBC. And what I do now, as I say, is I produce podcasts for a variety of clients across the UK and the world. I work for PR firms, I work for production companies, and I work remotely, so recording, producing, mixing audio content and also in person. But what I think I've been doing for the past 20 odd years or so is actually helping people to tell their stories in their own words, and that's what I want to help you to do too.
And you're going to be talking about a couple of things today, Ronnie. Tell us about those.
Yeah, so I'm really conscious that a lot of people are here because they're thinking about running a podcast themselves internally. I want to get to the nitty gritty of that, how you make podcasts internally, the kind of kit you need, the things you need to think about. I spend quite a bit of time there, but I think it's really important to set the context first. So we're going to be speaking about the context as well. But there is one thing I want everyone to think about and take away from this session, which is quality really matters for audio content just as much as it would for your website or the copy you produce or the video you produce. Audio is exactly the same. Please focus on the quality. And it's not as tricky as you think it might be to capture really good audio content.
So Ronnie, with that in mind, let's start with the context and how video and audio is being used in organizations. And I think you've got something to show us to show that power of
yes.
Audio for us.
Yeah, okay. So just to kind of set the scene, this is just one example of how you could use audio content. This is a film that I produced for a charity called the Normandy Memorial Trust, working for a production company called Snapping Turtle. And have a think about how I might have produced this content after we played a film. This is 2 minutes long. It's really worth listening to. This is a piece of multimedia content, but it's focused on audio. Let's have a play of it, and then let's have a chat about why it was so moving afterwards. Here we go.
Dad landed on Sword Beach wearing his kilt with Lord Lovett and the commandos at 7:30 a.m. Dad marched along the beach playing heel and laddie and rode to the Isles as men were killed by German machine gun fire and shell burst. Some men gave him a thumbs up and laughed as he ran past them. The pikes were motivating them, snapping them out of their fear and encouraged them to get off the beach. He witnessed horrific injuries and the death of many friends that morning, scenes he would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. My father's statue stands in Colville, Montgomery, just yards from the landing area on Sword Beach. Days before he died, he asked me if there would be any pipers at the unveiling of the statue. I said, of course there will. There'll be hundreds of pipes and drums. But there won't be a milling piper, he said. I foolishly promised to learn to play one tune on the pipes to play for him at the unveiling. He laughed and said, well, good luck with that, son. He knew how difficult it would be for me. My father died on the 18th of August 2010, and we unveiled his statue on the 8th of June 2013. I led the pipes with one of his favourites, Amazing Grace, accompanied by 500 pipes and drums from all around the world, and the Spitfire flypast. He would have been proud that I finally learnt to play, though I'm sure he would have had something to say about my skill level. Dad played the pipes under intense enemy fire on D-Day, 6th of June 1944, and witnessed the death of so many good friends. This is me playing the pipes for him, and in remembrance of all those who gave their lives in the Normandy campaign.
There you go. So that was just one of 75 stories that we told over 75 days leading up to the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And the story behind that content is that I was actually brought into the project just to write copy. And as soon as I saw the copy, I thought, do you know what? I've got to use what I know best, what my experience kind of tells me to use and what I love the most, which is audio. We actually recorded all of the audio you heard there was recorded on one of these, on a phone, even the bagpipes. And I'll talk you through how I managed to record that later. But I think you'll agree, it was a really moving story. I'm going to talk about measurement later and how I've got a slightly nuanced view of measurement. But for what it's worth, that film had a reach of over 700,000 on social media, that one film alone. And it encouraged the people that we were trying to reach to raise money for the project to tell their own stories as well. So why am I showing you this? Why did I play you that? It's because using audio can be a really powerful storytelling tool. As long as you record it pretty well and you think about the quality. And this isn't just about podcasts, it's about using audio in the round.
It's definitely much more emotion that comes through from hearing him tell his own story in his own tongue rather than us in the written word. Thank you for sharing that. You had some interesting insights in terms of how many of us are using podcasts internally at the minute as well, didn't we talk about this before?
That's right. Thanks for some lovely comments that are coming in, by the way, about, tears so early in the day. That film always gets me, and, might be slightly embarrassing if I was reaching for the hanky now. But, so look, thank you to Tamina from Somerset County Council, who's on the call today, for the heads up on this. But, who do we know who's using audio or podcasts for internal comms? Well, we don't know, do we? But then we don't know who's using anything for internal comms. We can take a guess, though. I can tell you what my clients do, and I'll come on to that in a minute. But we do have some insight from Gallagher's State of the Sector report, which I'm sure you all read. I was given a heads up about that by Tamina, as you say. And I had a look at, and just scanning it, I thought, well, I can't see anything related to audio here. So I Control F'd the word podcast. And guess how many times that came up? Yeah, it came up once. But it came up once with some really useful information, which was that according to the 1,300 organisations that Gallagher questioned or surveyed around the world, only 18% of them were using audio for internal comms work. Now, I don't know what you reckon about this. Feel free to post a comment in the chat. But I think that seems a bit kind of high potentially. I don't know. The other thing I thought about before I want to ask you in a minute, how many of you are using audio for your internal comms? The 18% figure rang a bell, and it rang a bell. I only realised a few days later because that's a figure that I'd also read. from a Department for Culture, Media and Sports report looking into the future of audio. And they worked out that, and this was using figures from Radar, the body that normally collates data for radio listening figures. This is back in 2020. 18% of the population, they thought at that time, were listening to at least one podcast per week. So what situation are we in? So we're in the situation where 1 in 5 of firms are using podcasts for internal comms, but actually over the past few years it looks like more people are listening to podcasts than ever before. So it was 18% a couple of years ago. The most recent figure says it's about 20%, but actually for 15 to 35 year olds, it looks like 1 in 3 people are listening to podcasts. So there's a gap there. 1 in 5 are using it for internal comms, but 1 in 3 are listening to it in their own time. So really, one of the things that you're doing when you're thinking about using a podcast as an internal comms tool is that you're giving your colleagues what they want, which is podcasts, because they're probably listening to them outside of work. But I did want to make this interactive, if I can. Can I ask you, if you can, just let me know with a thumbs up sign or a comment, how many of you are actually using podcasts for internal comms right now at the moment? Let's see some of them come in.
There's probably 6 or so far,
Okay,
out
all right.
of about 50 of us attending. So
Okay, all right. So not that many, but obviously there's an appetite for them. That's why you're here. That's fantastic. But how many of you listen to podcasts yourselves outside of work? How many listen to podcasts outside of work? I'll give you my thumb. There's my thumb. Great. Lots of people.
lots more fingers there, lots more thumbs. Yeah.
So this is exactly it, right? We listen to these things outside of work, but we don't necessarily use them inside of work. So that's the state of play, and the challenge now is to change that. Why do we think that people aren't using podcasts for internal comms? Any comments there? Any ideas? I've got my own idea.
Anyone want to chip in? Please unmute yourself. And
I see you've got some people saying I listen when I'm commuting. Thank you, Matthew O'Neill, who incidentally I should say is one of the hosts I worked with in the past. Thanks, Matthew. So look, I think one of the reasons that audio isn't being used is that there's still something of the maverick about using audio as an internal comms tool, something of the, a bit unorthodox. So I suppose in a way, part of this is challenging that orthodoxy and trying something new and trying to give your colleagues something that they want. It might also be maybe that the tech side of it is something that you don't understand, and I want to talk you through that today as well. But that's the situation, that's the current state of play.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. So I guess staying with our context theme very much, it's a case of how actually have you used sort of podcasts with your clients then, talking about internal comms campaigns?
Okay, great. So I've signed an NDA, so I can't go into a lot of detail. I can't name the client, but what I can say is it's a FTSE 100 company, and we've had a working relationship for about 3 years now. And the story of using audio and podcasts for them is one of evolution. So we started out with a pilot program. This was back in September 2019 when the first episode of the first pilot was launched. And how they started to use audio was that they had a new platform, a new app, which was how they were communicating with their colleagues. And they branded the podcast the same name as the app. And they recorded in person, because we could back then, obviously. And it was me and a sound engineer at their headquarters in London. We recorded it. I mixed it, mastered it, I edited it, and I sent it back, and they launched it on the platform. And this is where the evolution started, you see, because as soon as they launched this series, episode 1 of the first episode, that was the most engaged content they had up to that point in the year. So 3/4 of the way through the year, suddenly this audio material appears, and people around the world with this global organization were really keen to engage in it. So that's how it started. And then we made a few more episodes for them over the few remaining months of 2019. And then obviously COVID hit. And this is where the evolution increased in a way, because they needed to communicate with their staff about the practicalities of the pandemic. So, they've got offices out in the Far East, and they decided to use a podcast series to share really important information about, well, how do you get all of your workforce to work from home kind of overnight, sharing that information with everybody else around the world who hadn't been impacted at that stage by the pandemic. So that was a second mini series. The original series is still going. Further on into 2020, the company realized that they needed to reassure people around the world about health and safety, but also encourage them to continue to wash their hands. This is parts of the world, Africa at that time, as an example, hadn't been hit by the full wave yet. So they were finding that some of the people who were working for them in Africa might not have been taking the health and safety advice as seriously as they would have been. So they asked me about how they could use audio to do that. This is series 3 now. And I said, well, you need to be, how about we use the personal stories, in a monologue of someone who's suffered from COVID. And we played it. And a few months later, I found out from the head of comms, he reckoned that was a piece of content that genuinely saved lives, which was the most amazing thing to hear. Where are we now? Fast forward to now. We are still recording remotely, and that's what I do mostly now. But we're about to start another 2 series with this company. The original series is still going. It now exists by itself. It's not branded along with the platform anymore, because everyone knows about it. Everyone's talking about it. In fact, even the host of the podcast has got a new nickname with his colleagues around the world. He's called The Voice, because everyone knows who he is now. So that's it. It's a story of evolution, and it wouldn't have happened, and they wouldn't have been able to, engage with their colleagues around the world in the way that they have if they hadn't have started the initial pilot project. So it is about taking a punt on this and trialing it and seeing if it will work.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. And I noticed in the chat we've had a few, and we'll get on to the technical bit in a minute, won't we? But I noticed in the chat we've had a couple of questions around platforms to use for podcasts, so we can pick that up a bit later in the conversation, if that's okay.
Yes, quite. I mean, it's I think there's one here from MR about planning, recording, producing, but also finding a platform. I mean, look, what you could do is just share the MP3 file as an email. That's one of the most simple things to do. We'll come on to this in a second, but there is a technical side of this that I don't get involved in really, which is how do you host it on your site. And I think if you're thinking about engaging about using a podcast as a tool, one of the first people that I would speak to is the IT team. What format do you need these files to be in? How can you share them? It might be that you can work with audio files, which are MP3s, or maybe your internal platforms only take video files, MP4s. That will kind of tell you what you need to do from a technical side from the word go, which I think is the key to all of it.
And there's some of the other aspects that people have asked about too, in terms of trying to get that buy-in from the organisation, having the time and the right people. Is there any advice before we get into the technical stuff, which we will do, any advice you've got around getting that sort of leadership buy-in and finding our own voice? We all want a voice in our organisations.
Yeah, I think getting time in people's diaries is the biggest challenge for this material. We will talk about the process in a minute, but there's a reasonable amount of time involved even for the host and the guests to take part. So I always insist on a sound check with the host before you start the series off. That sound check takes about half an hour, and I and I insist the same thing with guests as well. So that's half an hour for the sound check on a separate day to the recording of the podcast. This is remotely. You might maybe do this all in person. The recording itself will take about an hour, so that's 90 minutes of someone's time. But they might have one of these, which is a USB mic, to set up. That's maybe some time that they need to spend themselves. If they don't make the time, then, and this goes back to my thread which runs through all of it, which is the quality. You need to spend time focusing on the quality of the podcast. And then for the project managers, those who are running this, and I would recommend that if you're running this as from an agency perspective or in-house, I'd recommend that one person's the project manager on this, because it's one person will be my partner. They'll be part of my production team who will give me the feedback. It might take quite a while for you. You might record an hour's worth of material, but you might only want, half an hour's worth of material. I mean, I would encourage you not to place an arbitrary timing on this. If the material's good, let it run. And because the way that your colleagues will listen to this material is what they're used to from listening to podcasts outside of work, which is they might listen to it in chunks. So it might be 45 minutes long, but they might split it in 3. But, you do need to allow quite a bit of time. How do you get the buy-in? Make the quality as good as it can be. Make the C-suite sound amazing. We're all self-conscious about how we sound on microphones. If you can make them sound great, then they're probably more likely to want to engage in it and to free up the budget to work with someone like me.
Okay, thanks, Ronnie. Now, I noticed we're about 23 minutes in. That question on length was actually asked by Mark in the chat. And so really, does it really depend on the subject matter then in terms of how long the podcast should be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always asked how long should it be, or we want a 15-minute podcast. And, Matthew O'Neill might be having a chuckle here because I've said this a lot to him. Let it be as long as it feels it needs to be. This is a conversation. When you met your husband or wife or your best mate, whatever, wherever that was, you didn't say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, but we've been talking for 17 minutes now, so thanks very much." You get lost in the conversation, don't you? That's one side of it. As I've just said, the other side of it is actually, I don't think people sit down and listen in a linear fashion. This isn't everyone kind of crowding around the wireless. This is, I'll listen to it when I've got time to. Maybe, I saw someone say in the chat, I listen on my commute. Other people listen on their runs or whatever. It's kind of chunks of material. So I wouldn't get hung up on it at all. I mean, if it's not engaging and it's long, that's what you want to avoid. But if it is engaging, why would you cut stuff out? It doesn't make any sense.
So some of the other points that are coming through around sort of that more technical stuff, and how and where we host and how we go about it. Should we move on to that kind of technical aspect as well? You can show us a bit about how to create our podcast if we were bold enough to do so.
Brilliant. This is the nitty gritty. This is the kind of the whole. This is the most important part of the chat, I think, today. So you've got choices when you're making your podcasts. The obvious one is, do you make it yourself, or do you work with someone like me who's an audio producer? Now, I'm not saying that you can't get good results by working for yourself. Of course you can, but remember, focus on the attention to detail and aim for the quality. So let's kind of start from the most simple way to start to capture that audio, and let's move on to something that's a bit more complicated. So what do you need to create a podcast? Well, actually, you could just have a laptop and a Zoom call. You're able to download audio tracks as separate tracks from Zoom. You can't do it on Teams. And then you have the content to work with. You could just use laptop mics, or I see some people have got headsets. That's what you could do as well. Some headsets are better than others, and in my experience, mics on laptops aren't great. Headsets aren't fantastic either, but you can get away with them. Get yeah, they do work as long as you think about how to make the best use of them. So think about the environment that you're recording, and this goes for whatever mic you've got, and I'll move on to phones and this thing in a minute, a USB mic. Think about what room you're in. Think about, is it a noisy atmosphere? When you're recording at home, and actually working remotely was great for me, because the people that I speak to now in their open plan offices, with glass walls and kind of lots of reflective surfaces, actually it was easier to capture their sounding quality when they were at home, maybe recording this stuff in their bedroom where there's carpets and beds and curtains and all that stuff to kind of soak up echo. So you really want to try to capture good audio, and you can do that on a laptop. Just before I move on to how you can use a phone to record audio, I just want to explain what good means. What I think it means is, well, obviously you want to hear people's voices clearly, all right? So you want to not be distracted by any unnecessary echo or maybe background noise, although actually there's a building site over the kind of hedge there which you might hear. My office here, I don't record my voice. I've got wooden floor, I've got my curtains open. If I was recording my voice, I wouldn't probably record in here. I've got a drum kit there. Don't put a drum kit where you're recording. And if I was going to record my voice now, I would probably record inside in the lounge or in the bedroom where there's not so much echo. So that's what good sounds like, and that's the quality that you should be aiming for, and that's not difficult. So how do you get around that? Pick the room, but also things like if you're sat at a desk, I haven't done this myself, a desk reflects a lot of the sound waves all over the place, so you can just put a coat or a blanket or a towel on the desk, and that has a perceptible difference in how it sounds. I can tell how it sounds when someone does that. So we've done the laptop. Let's move on to how you can use a phone. Okay, so this is really useful, and I do this with some of my clients. I know this is quite a long answer, but it's quite important to delve into the kit side of it and the mechanics of making it. So if you've got phones handy, feel free to pick them up. I can't see you, but I'm let's see if you're doing it. I'm going to show you now how your thumb is one of your most important bits of kit when you're making audio. So I'm going to move sideways now. This is how you use a phone to record. And first of all, I've got Apple everything. Very conscious that you might not have an Apple phone, but on Apple phones you can use something called voice memos. There's a voice memo app which ships on all Apple phones, and it ships with the mic picking it up in kind of low quality, but you can change it in the settings, which I'll let you do in your own time. So you go settings voice memos, and then I'm doing it on mine, and then you go down to audio quality and you change it from compressed to lossless, and then your phone is set to record in high res audio, which broadcast quality audio, which is great. And how you record on your phone is you go to the voice memo app, you hit the red button, but before you do that you make sure you're using your phone properly. So you don't use it like a phone like this, because actually your mouth's too close to the mic. Really good mics on these phones, but use them right. So put your elbow down on the desk, put your thumb on your chin, and put the phone like that. So the phone's going up like a ski slope. Can you see that? Feel free to move your hand. You don't have to keep it there whilst you're chatting. And then that's how you talk. And what you could do is you could be on a Teams call having a chat, but actually you're recording the audio on your phone. And if you're doing that as the guest or the host, and the guest or whoever else is doing that as well, then everyone, assuming that they are in a decent room, is recording in pretty good audio quality on their phones. And then you share the audio around, and that is great. Matthew O'Neill says, and he's right, there are apps you can use as well, Road Reporter app and all kinds of other apps. But if I'm honest, the kind of fail-safe, the one that's always worked for me, is voice memo apps. It's worked really well. So that's how you can use a phone. Incidentally, just to go back to the Piper story that I played you, that's exactly how I recorded all the audio for that. So the bagpipes, the commentary by John Millin, the Piper's son. That was all recorded on an iPhone and sent across. So that's the quality that you can get. And like I say, I've worked with that. It's not my top choice for recording really good audio, but it's much better than a laptop mic, which is fantastic. So you want the quality to be good enough so people will want to continue listening. What's the third option? And again, I know this is quite a long-winded answer, but bear with me, it's worth it. So this is something that's called a USB mic, this mic here. And this is a Rode NT USB mic. There you go. And these cost about £140. There's another mic about half the size by the same manufacturer, Rode, R-O-D-E, called an NT USB Mini, which is £87. So you don't have to spend loads of money to get really good microphones, and you also need a decent pair of headphones as well. And a decent pair of headphones might be 30 quid. So for what is that, 115, 120 quid, you've got some kit that enables you to record in great audio quality. Just bear with me for 1 second, because I want to explain also about why attention to detail matters when you're using microphones. 1 sec. So how am I sounding now? Can
Rubbish.
you hear me? Am I sounding all right? This is what I see. I see this all the time, even on the promo photos for this kit, right? Where the mic is in one place and the person's mouth is over here. And this is what it sounds like when you put the microphone on the other side of the table. But look, here's my thumb again. My most important bit of kit for recording. I'm going to put my thumb on my chin and move forward, right? And let's see if you can hear the difference. I'll count down from 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm hitting the mic on the back of my little finger there. That is how you use this microphone. It picks up in a certain way. I'm going to move my chair 1 sec.
So what's actually happening there, Ronnie, with the sound waves then?
Mics only pick up in a certain distance from the mic itself, and what you're hearing is the mic picking up a lot of the room and not enough of my voice. What you want is to pick up a lot of my voice and not a lot of the room. Now you can go too far. You can get right on top of the mic and talk like this, and that sounds a bit weird. And also there's quite a lot of energy that comes from your voice as well, right? That's what sound waves are. And so I also have the mic, so I'm looking at the computer now. That's 12 o'clock, right? You notice the mic's off to my left. So the mic, there was a laser beam from the middle of the mic. It's actually hitting me on the corner of my mouth. So the energy of my voice is kind of glancing the mic. It's not going straight into the mic, because things like P's and T's and S's, if you say pick that up or Peter Piper straight into the mic, you're getting a lot of energy there, and I can't. And this is a really good tip when you need to remember, whether you're working by yourself or with me, which we're going to talk about in a minute. There's only so much you can do in post-production, right? You can make nice audio sound much better, and you can fix some of the mistakes that you might have made in recording the audio, but what you can't do is make miracles. So if someone's quite loud, and I had this with a NASA astronaut once, which we had to get the audio right, the guy had a really loud voice, and even though the mic was kind of off to the left, whenever he said a P or a T or an S, which obviously is a lot when you talk, there was I could see the sound waves, and in fact maybe I'll show you in a sec, the sound waves, which is how I edit, were going kind of through the roof, and I can only take them down a bit. They still distort, so you want to make sure you don't get distortion when you're recording, because you can't fix that stuff.
It's very much the quality in.
Yes, that's exactly
determines
right.
the quality you get back out.
That's exactly right. Thank you for reminding me of that phrase, which I meant to bring in, which is quality in, quality out. Quality in, quality out. I can't make something that's not that good sound amazing, but I can make stuff that's pretty good sound even better. So yeah, that's the options. Laptops, all right. iPhones or other phones, pretty good actually if you think about the environment that you're recording in and you use them properly. USB microphones, not that expensive. Again, make sure you use them properly, otherwise it sounds like this, and that's not great. And I can't fix that in post-production. Okay, so
and a quick question on the sound while we're here. There was a question about recording out colleagues that are out on the road. A lot of us work with remote teams. They might not ever come into the office. They may never be working from home. Should we sit in the car with them and surround the car with some soft furnishings inside to help create the sound effects, or what would work?
So really part of this is all of you thinking like radio reporters or producers, right? I would say, what's the environment they're in? Does it lend itself to the story? So, one of the things I had to fix once was someone had recorded a podcast in New York, in Manhattan, and they were sat underneath an aircon unit, and I had to try and work out how to sample the sound of the aircon unit and remove it from the dialogue, which you can do, but it's pretty tricky and takes quite a lot of time. Actually, what I would have done if I was the radio reporter or if I was recording it myself is say I'd have gone onto the street and said, here we are, downtown Manhattan, and then you can hear the kind of hubbub and the background noise of a really major city where things are happening, and then that's it. And actually it sounds kind of counterintuitive, but you're increasing the background noise, but the background noise is part of the story. So you don't always need dead sound. Maybe the sound will lend something or, embellish, make the content even more powerful.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ronnie. That's really helpful. Hopefully that's helped answer that question.
I think you had some stuff to share as well, didn't you, Ronnie?
Yeah. So I've talked about how you can make audio content yourself. I should say, don't forget about one of the most important bits, which is the editing of the audio. So maybe I'll show you something in a second about how I edit audio. So you might record on your laptop. You might use Zoom to record the audio. You might have those separate tracks. But what happens if you want to chop it up? Well, editing audio really is a skill. It's a craft which takes a while to develop, but everyone should have a go because it's great fun. There are options out there for you to cut your own audio. You can use some software online called Audacity, which is free software. And if you just want to do a simple edit, which is maybe take the front bit of the podcast off and take the back bit of the podcast off, you can do that. But actually, if you want to chop the podcast up, and here's where the quality bit comes in, and you want it to not sound edited, that is actually quite a tricky skill. Let me try and share my screen here so I can show you how I edit a podcast. I'm going to first of all show you, if I can, how, one sec. Let me first of all show you what a podcast looks like, one that I've worked on quite recently, which is a podcast. There it is. Let's go to there. So this is, you should be seeing a.
Yeah, Data Brilliant.
Great, Data Brilliant. Right. So this is Apple Podcast. This is how a podcast looks when you might download it yourself. Right. Let's have a play of this. Hopefully the sound's going to work.
Joe Dos Santos, Chief Data Officer at Click. In this series, we explore how data is reshaping and redesigning.
Okay, so that's how a podcast looks when you download it. Let's look now, and hopefully your sound will work again. I'm going to stop share, and then we're going to go back into share again. Okay, so this is. Can you see that? Can you see? This is a bit of software called Adobe Audition. Okay, and this is how I edit a podcast. Right, this is called a multi-track session. Multi-track because these things here, these horizontal lines, are tracks, and on each track is a different aspect of the podcast. So let's play it.
Welcome to the Data Brilliant podcast with me, Joe Dos Santos.
So you just heard that on Apple Podcasts. That's what it actually looks like. So what we've got here, this green waveform here is the host, Joe. Incidentally, I recorded this all here from home in Devon. Joe's on one side of the coast in the States at home. This here, bed, is the music bed.
We explore how data is reshaping and redesigning.
And you'll see there's a curly line there. That's the fade.
Whether they be biblical stories, crime epidemics, financial misdeeds, or sports controversies, he's also been named one of the...
You can hear the music fading down there. This in the middle here, Malcolm, is the guest, the author Malcolm Gladwell, who you might have heard of. Let's have a listen to Malcolm.
So that term...
So that's Malcolm in his house on the other side of the States. And here's one of the edits. Let's see if you can hear the edit. And how I edit is, so I get all of these waveforms lined up here like this, and then my clients ask me to cut them up, and it's down to me to make the edits. So any kind of vertical line you might see here, any white vertical line is an edit. And I make the edit, I make the cut, and then what I do is I play it and I shut my eyes and listen. And if I can hear the join, then I keep doing it until I can't hear the join anymore. I'm hoping that this join's okay because I've not played this one, but let's see if we can hear an edit.
Shows up in a variety of different settings. You know, my last book, Talking to Strangers.
There you go. That's one. That was a join. I bet this one down here.
Or physics problem of how to drop a bomb and have it hit its target. Then we've changed warfare forever. His antagonist is a man named Curtis. Warfare forever. His antagonist.
Now that join there might have been 2 minutes between that bit and that bit. He might have said all kinds of other stuff in the middle. I can't remember what he said, but
forever. His antagonist.
But I've joined it together, and I hope you agree, I don't think you can hear the join there, and that's what it's about. It's about finding things like bits of the breath, bits of it's called wild track, room noise that you can use to chop it up. But it's not quite as simple as that, because obviously what you're trying to do is to try and make this authentic. This is an authentic conversation, so it really matters what type of breath you pick. It really matters that you pick it, that the intonation works. Let me stop sharing my screen. And that's why it's a real craft, and that's why I spend quite a lot of my time just sat with my eyes shut, just trying to hear if this stuff makes sense, even though it's got, one episode might have 40 or 50 cuts in it, but I don't want to hear any of those cuts. And actually, when I listen to podcasts, it drives my wife nuts. I'm tormented sometimes by the edits that I can hear. I can't kind of get away from the technical side of it. I probably don't listen to as many podcasts as you guys do, because it just drives me around the bend.
You find your ears are tuned into it all of the time and every little nuance, I imagine.
A bit too much, to be honest.
Thank you. Should we go to some of the questions? I've seen it.
Well, I was going to say there's one thing that Ronnie wanted just to talk about briefly, was about measurement.
Oh, yes. Well, remember to go.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Okay, look, so you've got a massive advantage, and as people who work in internal comms, you've got an advantage perhaps even over Apple Podcasts that you just saw there, because you control the platforms. You might have even created the platforms where this content is going to be based. So I might have mentioned this earlier on when I talked about the technical side of the podcast, what format, speak to the tech team. Actually, I would think about measurement from the word go. If you're thinking about a podcast, the first thing I would think about is, how do I measure it? From a variety of perspectives. Now, you might have a traditional budget holder that you're trying to sell this to, who wants, data, who wants to know, percentage of listeners. Maybe they want to know how long a person is listening for. Maybe you want to find out what part of the world in your organization they're listening. Maybe you might even want to find out who the actual individual is who's listening and how long they're listening for. It's possible, I imagine, for you to speak to your IT teams and, work out how you can get some of or all of that data. That's amazing if you want to go down that route. But actually, I've got a slightly nuanced approach on measurement, and what we're really talking about here is value, aren't we? Because I think actually some of the most valuable metrics that you get from working with audio, which is a human, element. It's a conversation that you're using as a tool, genuine conversation, are the things that you can't measure. So let's say, I don't know, you want to speak to people to reassure them because they're scared about, I don't know, the pandemic, or they're worried about change. How do you measure someone feeling a bit less worried? Maybe, you want to empower someone, you want someone to feel more confident in themselves. Maybe it's a host who, just needs a bit of personal development. Maybe they've got a talent they don't know they've got yet, and you're thinking, well, you could turn them into a key spokesperson for your organization externally, or maybe they could be the person, in your team who passes on that information to the organization about change. How do you measure that? Maybe measurement for audio, for podcasts, maybe you need to kind of think again, and maybe you need to engage with people, and maybe even spend money on it, just because it's a nice thing to do, because it's nice to be nice to people, because it's a kind thing to do, and there's value in that. It doesn't give you metrics. I call them metrics that count, and maybe they're the most valuable of all.
That's such a good point. And something a lot of people are crying out for is that connection after the pandemic, and while we sort of battle our way through hybrid and non-hybrid working and everything else, and getting everybody connected again. Thank you so much, Ronnie. It's been brilliant.
No worries. We've got a few more questions. Yeah, there's one about recording into your laptop. So much like your phone, laptops all come with software already installed on them for you to record audio on. So if you've got a Mac, that's the same thing. That's voice memos. If you're on a PC, there's some software that you should be able to find in your apps called Voice Recorder. That's how you can record it. Just make sure when you do this, just make sure that the input into your computer, so in your settings, the input is whatever microphone you're using. Also, you don't need to worry about that if you're recording into your laptop mic. But if you're plugging something in, like a USB mic, make sure that the input is set to that mic. Otherwise, you'll actually be recording the laptop mic instead of that mic. But the way around that is, you could just say, well, we're going to do all the recording on a laptop, but we're going to use a phone like I showed you. That's probably a bit more straightforward to record that. I should say as well, if I haven't mentioned this already, I know we've only got 10 minutes left. The word quality means kind of two different things for podcasts. You're trying to get genuine conversation, right? That's the content you're trying to capture. So we talked about the technical side of it. I've gone through that in quite a bit of detail, and have a play with this. That's how you get better at using it. But the other side is the quality of the people who are talking. So actually, you need to turn yourself into a talent scout, really, in your organization. Now, some people are better at talking than others. Some people are more engaging than others. What you really want to do, particularly as a host, and I would really encourage you to think about having the host of your podcast, I would recommend is someone who you work with. It doesn't have to be someone in the C-suite or higher. It could be anybody. Someone who's just naturally engaging. Someone who's going to spend time, researching the subject, but someone who's really good with people. Someone who can get... who can encourage someone else to maybe reveal something quite deep and personal about themselves on microphone. That's where the real quality is as well. So there's a technical quality, but also the quality of the genuine conversation. That's what you need to really focus on. And it is partnership. This whole thing is about partnership. The reason that the content that I work, I like to think, sounds so good is not just because of the work that I do, it's because of the partnership I have with the account team or the in-house team that I work with. I'm not the person, on the other end of the microphone sometimes setting the microphone up. You might be setting your microphone up for someone else to talk into. It's down to you to pick the room, down to you to make sure the mic works, down to you, as I just said, to pick the people, but also, being on microphone, on mic, is quite stressful and daunting. It's also down to you to have those soft skills to get people into the right place, and also to reassure them, to manage expectations. Everybody who I've worked with has started off pretty good as a host or a guest, but by episode 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever, suddenly they're, there's huge improvement there, and they can tell it themselves, and that's really empowering. But the soft skills are probably at least as important as the technical skills when you're making this stuff. So, don't forget that, and try to focus on the quality from all aspects at every point of the production process.
Okay, we talked about length earlier of podcasts. There is also a question about editing as well. So how sometimes do you broach that subject if somebody wants to talk for that amount of time, but you only really want a very short podcast? When it comes to editing, how do you have that conversation?
I would just let people talk. What you're trying to do is capture a genuine conversation. I think if people feel like they're being limited in what they can say, I think they're less likely to be themselves. And, we've all been through media training, and I should say as well, one of the great bits of added value from working in podcasts is, well, can anybody else tell me how you'd get 10 hours worth of on mic training apart from doing a 10-part podcast series? So I don't know how much 10 hours worth of media training would cost, but probably quite a bit more than producing a podcast series. Just let people talk and then cut it up yourself. Now, you might get an hour's worth of material and say, hang on a second, this is, too much for one episode. Maybe you might say, okay, we're going to turn it into 3 episodes. Or you might just let it run. But I would always be guided by the quality, As humans, we know what a good conversation is, as, an engaging conversation. And I hope I haven't reached this point, if it's a bit dull and not interesting anymore, then that's the stuff to cut. If it's really interesting, but you're thinking, oh yeah, but I'm 35 minutes and I want it to be 25, leave it in. You have to leave it in, because otherwise no one's going to know what wasn't there. And, it might be really engaging for someone. You could always put in the show notes, you could say, look, this is a 40-minute episode at these various time codes. This is what we talked about. And then it's almost like an a la carte kind of thing there. People can dive in and listen or not listen to bits they don't care about. I would say, more is more with this stuff. This is the platform to run stuff longer. This is the platform to explain complicated stuff, because you've got the time to do it. If you cut it back, then, it's getting really similar to the other types of content that you use. Then you might start asking yourself, well, what am I using this for?
So do you think this is quite a good place for those sort of nuanced conversations where we're traversing some complex topics?
Yeah, absolutely. This is it. Sometimes communicating with your colleagues is about really complicated stuff. And, there's only so much you can fit into a 2-minute video. And it isn't, obviously, we all know this, it isn't either or. It isn't I'll do a podcast or I'll do a video or I'll do some copy or I'll do some in-person meetings or do some roadshows or webinars or whatever. They're all complementary. So, you might say, oh, well, hang on, for this part of the campaign, we're going to do an infographic, because, that's quite zappy and we can, get into that. But, I would encourage you to think, everyone's got a story. And there's a person behind every story, and there's a people element to every campaign. So the people stuff is the podcast stuff. If it's about a person, use the podcast for the people stuff, but cross promote, talk about it, and this is one thing that I really would encourage everyone to do. I don't think people are going to suddenly find this stuff if you don't promote it either. You know, if you make this stuff and you've focused on the quality, and I'll keep repeating that, you're really proud how it sounds, the host is really proud how it sounds, the guests think they sound amazing, that's all great. If you don't make it really obviously available for someone, they're not going to find it. So do cross promote it. Use the video to tell people about the podcast. Use the podcast to tell people about the video. Use the copy to tell people about both. You might even think, hang on, and this is another added value, this stuff's great. This is amazing. Actually, we could send this out externally. We could put it as we could turn it into, you know, a little montage for social media. We could, and I used to do this when I worked at the MOD for 5 years in comms, we could actually, instead of sending out a press release, we could send out some of this audio instead with a headshot of the person who's speaking to news desks and say, right, you're not getting anything else apart from this. Off you go. And they'll initially say, well, you know, but we need a transcript. And you'll say, yeah, but you know how to do the shorthand, don't you? So off you go. And that's what you can use this stuff for. But the thread of quality runs all the way through it. And if you stick to that, you know, you're going to have this content with legs, you know, this content that runs and runs.
Thank you. There's a couple of more practical questions around how and where you would access the music that you could use in a series. So any pointers on that?
Yeah, so there are lots of companies out there that you can buy the rights to music to produce with. It can be quite expensive, I'll be honest. How I tend to do it, I work with production companies who have got those deals anyway. I found out just recently for myself, it's about 140 quid for one piece of music. So you know, that's for the global rights for that, particularly if you're a global organization. I think there are different rates if it's only being used internally. So there's one firm called Audio Network, and they have composers working for them who make this type of music to be used in production processes. I mean, you might not need music. You might just need a sting. You know, I wouldn't go to town with the music. If you use the music, make sure the music's not too loud. It doesn't take away from the content. Yeah, that's how you can use music, but use it sparingly.
Sparingly is the trick. And the other practical aspect was around platforms. I know that you said you don't tend to get involved in the organizational corporate end of where it's hosted, but have you had much experience? Is there any advice for people? People are asking questions like where they would host and what sort of platforms they could use.
Yeah, what you could do, and I have done this in the past, you could use a site called SoundCloud. There's a way you can make the audio private in SoundCloud. So you get some code, and only that code will open the software or the clip. And you with SoundCloud, you can also get code that you can embed into a website, and it just shows a photograph. I would recommend someone's headshot with a play sign, and it will only play for people who have got that code, so it's private only inside your organization. Or you know, you could just, if it's an MP3 file, it's not very big, you could just share it as a link on an email. But your tech teams will know about this. The files, you know, they're just files like a video file is, so there'll be a way for you to share it in a similar way.
That's really helpful. We've got to our 1:30 moment very nearly, so I just want to thank you very much for joining us. If anybody's got any extra questions, do put them in the chat. We will save the chat. We have recorded the session so we can catch up on it as well another time. They've got a few events coming up in the next month or so. I just share my screen so you can see those. We've got the line manager communication discussion happening on the 18th of October, and on the 3rd of November there's communicating projects with the wonderful Anne Pilkington, who's joining us. And then of course there is the CIPR conference on the 8th of November. I really appreciate Ronnie's time. Michael, have you got anything to add before we close?
No, just to say a big thanks to Ronnie. That's been really informative, and you can certainly see in the chat that a lot of appreciative comments from people. So thanks very much.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. Sorry, I interrupted you there. bad podcast behavior. We will capture the chat and try and do a quick write-up with some of the questions, and anything that we haven't managed to answer today, we'll scoop up in that write-up with Ronnie. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Cheerio.